Something just happened in American politics that hit like a lightning strike. Two events, almost simultaneous, that weren't supposed to connect, but they do. A major media network launched a dramatic rumor about Trump removing the FBI director and watched it collapse within hours. And at that exact moment, J.D. Vance issued the bluntest warning yet about corruption and failures happening inside our own country. But here's the part no one on television is telling you. These two stories are not separate. They are two sides of the same crack forming beneath the surface. Why did the media push a narrative built on sand? Why did it fall apart so fast? And what explosive truth was revealed the moment it collapsed? Stay with me, because once you see the hidden thread connecting these events, you'll understand something most Americans still don't see, and it changes the entire picture. Here's what happened, and when you look at it carefully, you'll see why it matters far beyond just one headline. A national cable network pushed out a breaking report claiming that President Trump was considering removing Kash Patel as FBI director in the coming months. They cited three unnamed individuals described as having knowledge of the situation. On the surface, it feels authoritative. Free sources, inside information, red banner flashing across the bottom of the screen. But when you slow down, when you actually listen to the language, something else emerges. They didn't say a decision had been made. They didn't say Patel was being replaced. They didn't even say there was a plan in motion. They leaned on softer, conditional phrasing, considering, may remove him, responding to unflattering headlines. And here's the part most viewers overlook. Language like that isn't accidental. It allows a headline to sound definitive while the substance remains speculative. It creates the impression of movement inside Washington without the burden of proving anything. It's a pattern we've seen for years. Float a possibility. Let it ripple through social media. Let panelists debate it for hours. And by the time anyone checks the accuracy, the narrative has already hardened. But this time, the pattern cracked. According to Reuters political reporting on November 25th to 26th, 2025, President Trump publicly dismissed the rumor the same day it circulated. While speaking with reporters during his travel schedule, he was asked directly whether he planned to replace FBI Director Kash Patel. His response, as quoted by Reuters, was unequivocal. He rejected the claim and stated that Patel was doing a good job, leaving no ambiguity, no hesitation, and no conditional language to sustain the story. And then came the part that shut the door completely. The White House released a photo from the Oval Office showing Trump and Kash Patel together, paired with an official statement from the press secretary calling the report inaccurate, labeling it, in fact, as fake news. And when you see how fast the story collapsed, when you compare the certainty of the headline to the vagueness of the language behind it, it raises a deeper question. If one speculative report can shape a national narrative for several hours, how many others have shaped the public view for years? That's where the larger system comes into view. Now, think about how rare that is. Usually, when a story like this comes out, it takes days for the administration to respond. Sometimes they don't respond at all, figuring the news cycle will move on. But this time, Trump flipped the script so fast that the rumor collapsed almost as quickly as it appeared. And that quick collapse exposed something much bigger. It revealed just how fragile these narratives can be when they're built on nothing but speculation and anonymous sources. For people watching from home, this kind of thing is exhausting. You turn on the news expecting to understand what's happening in the country. And instead, you get conflicting stories, anonymous sources, speculative language, and then a complete reversal a few hours later. It's confusing. It creates doubt. And over time, it erodes trust. Because here's the reality. If the media can float a rumor that gets debunked within hours, what else are they getting wrong? What other stories are being shaped by speculation instead of facts? And that's where the emotional fatigue sets in. Seniors, more than any other group, value clarity and honesty. You've lived through enough to know when something doesn't add up. You've seen enough political cycles to recognize when a story is designed to create controversy rather than inform. When that happens over and over again, it's not just frustrating, it's alienating. It makes you wonder whether anyone in the media is actually interested in telling the truth, or whether they're just chasing the next headline. But while the media played games with rumors about Kash Patel, everyday Americans were facing real domestic problems. And that's where J.D. Vance entered the conversation. Just as the Kash Patel rumor was collapsing, Vance's warning hit even harder because it arrived at the exact moment federal prosecutors in Minnesota were detailing a verified and a deeply troubling fraud case. According to an official press release from the U.S. Department of Justice dated March 19, 2025, a federal jury found key defendants guilty in the Feeding Our Future scheme, a sprawling criminal operation that diverted more than $250 million in federal child nutrition funds during the pandemic. Prosecutors described it as one of the largest COVID-era fraud cases ever uncovered in the United States, a case built not on speculation or anonymous whispers, but on months of documented financial evidence, coordinated indictments, and courtroom testimony. For Vance, that contrast mattered. A rumor built on conditional language fell apart within hours, but a $250 million fraud case, validated by a jury and detailed by the DOJ, exposed far deeper structural failures at home. It underscored his larger argument. While media attention surged around fast-moving headlines, real domestic vulnerabilities were widening in plain sight, with consequences measured in taxpayer losses rather than political theater. And this is where J.D. Vance's response cut through the noise. He did not treat the case as an isolated lapse. He framed it as part of a larger, recurring pattern, one where accountability is inconsistent, enforcement is uneven, and the real costs are carried by taxpayers who play by the rules. He emphasized that this was not merely a story about one mailbox or one fraudulent company. It was a window into a national problem, repeating in city after city and state after state, revealing cracks that reach deeper than a single courtroom or a single judge. Because when you look closer, this case is not an outlier. It is a symptom. He raised a question that was simple but crushing. Why is this happening in a country where political leaders stay fixated on foreign conflicts and beltway drama, yet fail to repair the problems unfolding right at home? That question cut deep, especially if you are a senior living on a fixed income, watching your savings erode under inflation, seeing housing prices double or even triple, struggling to afford care despite Medicare, and then hearing that more than $7 million in taxpayer funds were stolen, only for the people involved to walk free. That is not just frustration. That is anger. It makes the system feel distant, unresponsive, almost indifferent. And Vance did not stop at emotion. He laid out domestic issues that have been building for years. He pointed to housing costs that now make homeownership unrealistic for younger Americans and a heavy strain for older ones trying to downsize or help their children. He pointed to the Affordable Care Act marketplace, once meant to expand access, now weighed down by higher premiums and fewer real choices. He pointed to the national debt, now roughly $38 trillion, a number so large that most people cannot grasp it, yet someone will one day pay the cost. He pointed to violence in major cities where innocent people are attacked while some local leaders resist federal help. And he pointed back to the Minnesota fraud case, noting a disturbing allegation raised by investigators. Stolen taxpayer money does not always stay inside the country. Sometimes it is sent overseas, potentially to extremist groups. It sounds like fiction, but prosecutors say these schemes are real. And all of this exposes a deeper failure. The systems meant to prevent abuse are not functioning. And while these problems grow, while housing becomes unreachable, while healthcare costs rise, while fraud goes unpunished, while cities become less safe, the political class stays focused somewhere else entirely, on foreign conflicts, on shifting media narratives, on whether the Trump administration may end a 4-year war in Eastern Europe. The gap between Washington's priorities and the daily reality of ordinary Americans has rarely felt wider. Vance's point was direct but devastating. The amount of passion poured into that single foreign issue, compared to the near silence surrounding problems here at home, is completely out of balance. This is not to say foreign policy is unimportant. It matters, and reasonable people can disagree about the right approach to any conflict. But here is the deeper issue. When insiders in Washington show more fire over Ukraine than they do over fraud, inflation, rising debt, and violence on American streets, something has gone fundamentally sideways. And seniors feel that imbalance more than anyone, because you are the ones living with the consequences. You are the ones watching your purchasing power shrink. You are the ones navigating a healthcare system that grows more complicated and more expensive every year. You are the ones worrying about safety in your neighborhoods, about whether your grandchildren will ever afford a home, and about whether the country you help build is being steered in the right direction. That is why Vance's message struck such a chord. It was not just criticism, it was a warning signal. A reminder that this nation is facing serious challenges, challenges that demand serious leadership, and the people in charge need to start acting as if those challenges truly matter. Because right now, it does not feel that way. So let's connect the pieces. On one side, you have a media rumor that collapses within a few hours because it was built on speculation instead of evidence. On the other side, you have a domestic fraud case that reveals structural failures while the political class remains more focused on events overseas than on the crises unfolding inside their own borders. And when you place those two realities next to each other, a pattern begins to emerge. The pattern is misplaced focus, a media ecosystem that chases rumors instead of accountability, and a political establishment that invests its energy in foreign drama instead of domestic urgency. And the result is predictable. Real problems go unsolved, real fraud goes unpunished, and real people are left without the leadership they deserve. Now you might be asking yourself, how did we end up here? How did the system drift so far from what ordinary people actually need? It is a fair question, because these problems did not appear overnight. They have been building for years, some for decades. What has changed is that the disconnect has grown so stark, so visible, that ignoring it is no longer possible. The distance between what political leaders talk about and what everyday Americans face has widened into a crisis of confidence. Think about what you see when you turn on the news. You see panels debating foreign policy. You see breathless commentary about the latest Washington scandal. You see endless speculation about who is rising, who is falling, who will be fired next. But how often do you see consistent, serious coverage of the issues that shape your daily life? How often do you hear a deep investigation into why housing has become unaffordable, why healthcare premiums keep climbing, or what safeguards exist to prevent fraud inside government programs? Not often. And when these issues do get covered, they are treated like isolated incidents, never as symptoms of larger systemic failures. That is where the frustration takes root. Seniors remember a different kind of journalism, one that investigated power rather than echoed it. A time when newsrooms prioritized clarity over spectacle. A time when a jury verdict meant something, and when judges did not overturn unanimous decisions simply because they preferred a different outcome. And here is the important part. This is not nostalgia. It is a reminder of what becomes possible when institutions function the way they were designed to. When media outlets pursue truth instead of clicks, when the justice system values accountability over personal interpretation, and when political leaders focus on the problems facing their constituents instead of the topics dominating cocktail conversations in Washington. So when J.D. Vance stood up and said, "Show some passion for our own country," he was giving voice to a frustration millions have carried for years. He was naming something people instinctively felt but rarely heard acknowledged aloud. And the reaction was immediate. People shared it, discussed it, repeated it, because it did not sound like political theory. It sounded like common sense. The timing could not have been sharper, because just as Vance delivered that message, the media was busy trying to explain why their Kash Patel story had collapsed. The contrast was unmistakable. On one side, Vance was focused on real problems affecting real people. On the other side, the media was scrambling to justify a report built entirely on anonymous voices and speculative language. It felt like watching two different versions of the country collide in real time. And these moments matter far more than they first appear. On the surface, it may look like just another news cycle, another flare-up that will fade by next week. But it is bigger than that. These moments act as signals, markers of something deeper shifting in how Americans view their institutions and the people who lead them. When a media rumor crumbles within hours, it is not only embarrassing for the outlet that published it. It becomes another data point in a growing story about lost credibility. Every time it happens, it reinforces the belief that stories are being shaped by agendas instead of evidence. And that carries real consequences, because an informed citizenry depends on reliable information. When trust in those sources breaks down, democratic confidence breaks down with it. The same is true in the courtroom. When a jury's unanimous verdict is overturned by a judge who simply disagrees, it becomes more than one fraud case. It raises questions about whether the justice system is functioning as intended. It raises questions about whether ordinary citizens still play a meaningful role in holding wrongdoers accountable, or whether their decisions can be brushed aside by someone who believes their judgment carries more weight. When people witness that, it eats away at their trust. It makes them wonder whether the rules apply equally, or whether there is one set of rules for the public and another set for those with the right connections or sympathetic judges. And when political leaders pour more energy into foreign policy debates than into the crises unfolding inside their own borders, it sends another unmistakable message about priorities. It tells voters that the concerns keeping them awake at night, affordability, safety, corruption, rank lower than the issues dominating think tank conferences and cable news panels. And that widening gap is exactly where public confidence starts to fracture. Over time, all of this creates a quiet kind of alienation, a sense that the political class is living in a different universe, one where the problems that shape ordinary American life barely register. And when you step back and look at these three forces together, the media's credibility crisis, the justice system's accountability crisis, and the political class's priority crisis, you begin to see a pattern emerging. And that pattern explains why American politics feels so volatile, why voters are so frustrated, and why someone like Donald Trump was able to overturn the old order in the first place. People are not naive. You can feel when you are being told one version of reality while living something entirely different. And once that disconnect grows too large to ignore, voters start looking for leaders who acknowledge it, who speak to it directly, who promise to confront it instead of pretending it does not exist. That is exactly what Vance was doing. He was naming the gap out loud. He was putting words to something millions of Americans had sensed for years, but rarely heard from their elected leaders. And that mattered, because in politics, sometimes the most disruptive act is simply speaking the truth that everyone else can already see. So let's bring this full circle. Remember where we began, with two events unfolding almost at the same time. A media rumor collapsing under its own weight, and a political leader calling out domestic failures. When you view those events together, something becomes clear. The old playbook no longer works. The media cannot float rumors and expect blind acceptance. Political leaders cannot ignore domestic crises and assume voters will be satisfied with speeches about foreign policy. The ground has shifted, and you, especially seniors, are at the center of that shift because you remember how institutions used to operate, how leaders used to communicate, how accountability used to look. You can see how far things have drifted from what they should be. And increasingly, you are the ones demanding something better, not out of partisanship, but out of lived experience. You know what competent governance looks like, and what you are seeing now is not it. So what does this mean moving forward? It means we are entering a moment where clarity, honesty, and a focus on domestic realities will matter more than ever. Voters will reward leaders who speak plainly, who confront the issues shaping everyday life, and who deliver results instead of excuses. And they will punish those who chase headlines, who prioritize Washington drama, and who treat the country's problems as an afterthought. And this is not just an opinion. The data reflects it. Look at the polling numbers mentioned earlier. J.D. Vance has become one of the most favorably viewed political figures in the country, not because he is flashy or traditionally charismatic, but because he speaks directly to the concerns people actually carry. He does not talk down to voters. He does not pretend problems do not exist. He names them, explains them, and lays out solutions. People respond to that because, in a political climate that often feels distorted, it feels real. Meanwhile, the media outlets that continue relying on anonymous sourcing and speculative reporting are watching their credibility decline even further. The old model, where a handful of gatekeepers controlled the narrative and the public simply accepted it, is breaking apart. And as that system crumbles, it creates room for something new, a space that demands more transparency, more accountability. Whether that space produces better journalism or worse journalism remains to be seen, but the shift is underway whether the old guard accepts it or not. In the justice system, cases like the Minnesota fraud case are turning into flashpoints for a broader debate about fairness and accountability. When a judge overturns a unanimous jury verdict in such a sweeping manner, it raises questions that go far beyond one trial. It raises questions about judicial activism, about the balance of power between judges and juries, and about whether the system is being bent to protect some individuals while punishing others. Those questions will not disappear. If anything, they are likely to grow louder as more cases like this surface. But here is the upside. When the problems become this visible, they become harder for institutions to shrug off. When the disconnect becomes this wide, pressure for reform starts to build. And that pressure can manifest in multiple ways. It can show up at the ballot box as voters choose leaders who focus on domestic issues. It can emerge through media competition as new platforms challenge the credibility of legacy outlets. It can drive legal reforms as lawmakers respond to judicial overreach. Or it can come from all directions at once. The point is simple. The status quo is not fixed. The system moves when enough people push. And right now, the push is stronger than it has been in many years. People are exhausted. They are tired of being misled. They are tired of watching fraudsters walk free. They are tired of leaders obsessing over issues that have little impact on daily life while ignoring the crises unfolding at home. And that exhaustion, slow, steady, and widespread, is beginning to translate into real action. You can see the shift in the polling. You can see it in how certain stories spread across social media. You can even see it in the size of the crowds that show up for leaders who speak plainly about these issues. The energy is real. The only question now is whether that energy gets directed toward genuine change, or whether it fades into the kind of cynicism that keeps people on the sidelines. And that is where each of us has a role. Change does not arrive on its own. It requires participation. It requires staying informed, asking hard questions, holding leaders accountable, and refusing to accept narratives that do not match the realities you see with your own eyes. For many of you, that may mean sharing your perspective with younger family members, helping them understand how things have shifted and why it matters. It may mean staying engaged in local and national politics, even when the process feels exhausting. It may mean supporting leaders who focus on the issues that shape everyday life and calling out those who do not. Because here is the truth. You bring experience. You bring context. You bring decades of perspective on what works and what does not. In a political environment that often feels disconnected from reality, that kind of grounding is invaluable. If you found this breakdown useful, especially given everything happening right now, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Tell me what part of this situation struck you the most. Was it how quickly the Kash Patel story collapsed? Was it the outrageous details of the Minnesota fraud case? Was it J.D. Vance's point about misplaced priorities? Your voice matters, especially when moments like this reveal so much about where the country truly stands. By engaging, by sharing your perspective, you contribute to a broader conversation about what kind of nation we want moving forward and what kind of leadership Americans deserve. Because at the end of the day, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires each of us to stay informed, stay engaged, and demand better from the people who claim to represent us.